She was the most powerful woman in the building, and she was sitting alone in a bar on Christmas Eve, crying into a glass of whiskey like someone who had lost everything. He almost walked past her. Almost. But Logan Reed had never been good at looking the other way when someone was falling apart, even when that someone was his boss. Even when getting involved was the worst idea he'd ever had. He stopped. He sat down. And in that one unthinking moment of human decency, he cracked open a door that neither of them would ever be able to close again. Quote, if this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along to the end, because what happens between these two people is going to stay with you long after it's over. Thus, the office building on Weston Avenue was the kind of place that looked impressive from the outside and felt hollow on the inside. 42 floors of glass and steel that caught the afternoon light beautifully and meant absolutely nothing after 6 p.m. On any other night, Logan Reed would have been in and out in under 10 minutes. Grab the quarterly projections from his desk, stop by the copy room for the supplemental spreadsheets Marcus had left for him, and get back to his car before the snow picked up again. That was the plan. But Logan had been a single father long enough to know that plans were mostly suggestions. He was still in the elevator when his phone lit up with a picture of Mason and Lily, both 6 years old, both grinning with the particular unhinged energy of children who had consumed too many candy canes and been promised Santa was on his way. His sister Deborah had sent the photo with a caption that read, "They are feral. Come home soon, or I'm leaving them outside." He smiled at the phone and typed back, "Don't let them eat the tinsel again." The elevator opened on the 31st floor. The office was dark, except for the emergency lighting near the exits and the ambient glow of the city coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Logan moved quickly through the bullpen, found his desk, grabbed the folder, and was back in the hallway in 4 minutes flat. He should have taken the elevator straight down. Instead, he remembered the copy room was on 30, not 31, and Marcus's notes were absolutely critical for the January pitch deck, and he made the mistake of taking the stairs, which put him at a different angle coming out of the stairwell, which meant he passed by the glass-walled conference room on the corner, which meant he had a clear line of sight across the hallway to the window, which meant he saw the light burning in Ava Sinclair's office. He stopped. Her office was at the end of the hall, separated from the rest of the floor by a short corridor and a set of frosted glass doors. The light inside was the warm amber of the floor lamp she kept in the corner. Logan knew, because he'd been in that office maybe 30 times in the 2 years he'd worked at Sinclair Capital, always for scheduled meetings, always with at least 2 other people present, always while Ava Sinclair sat at the head of the conference table with the specific kind of composure that made you feel vaguely like you'd been called into the principal's office. She was the CEO, had been since she was 26, youngest person in the company's history to hold the title, which everybody knew because somebody had framed the article from the Financial Journal and hung it in the lobby, and Ava had clearly never asked them to take it down. She was brilliant, exacting, and not particularly interested in being liked. She had a way of looking at a spreadsheet that made it feel like the spreadsheet owed her an apology. She never raised her voice, which somehow made it worse when she was displeased. Logan respected her. He also found her exhausting to be around, in the way that genuinely sharp people could be exhausting, because she always seemed to be operating 3 steps ahead, and keeping up required effort. He had not expected to find her office light on at 7:30 on Christmas Eve. He stood in the hallway for a moment, genuinely uncertain. Then, because he was constitutionally unable to mind his own business, he walked to the frosted doors and knocked. Nothing. He tried the handle. Unlocked. He pushed the door open an inch and said, "Hello?" The office was empty. He stood there feeling vaguely idiotic, then noticed her coat on the chair, her good coat, the charcoal wool one she always wore, and her bag on the floor beside the desk, and her phone sitting face down on the edge of the credenza. She'd been here recently. Maybe she'd stepped out to the bathroom. He backed out, let the door close, and stood in the hallway for another moment weighing his options. He could leave a note, or he could just go. He went with going. He was halfway to the elevator when he heard it, not from the office, but from the small kitchen alcove at the other end of the hall. A low sound. Not quite a voice. More like the kind of sound a person makes when they're trying very hard to not be heard doing something they'd be embarrassed by. Logan turned around. The kitchen alcove was barely a room, just a counter, a sink, a mini-fridge, and a Keurig that the company had purchased as a morale initiative and that everyone used constantly because the coffee in the lobby cost $4. There was also, inexplicably, a bottle of Johnny Walker Black sitting on the counter next to a single rocks glass. And sitting on the floor, back against the cabinets under the sink, shoes off, in her usual tailored slacks and white blouse, with the top 2 buttons undone, was Ava Sinclair. She had her knees pulled loosely to her chest and a glass in one hand and the particular expression of someone who had been sitting alone with their thoughts long enough that the thoughts were starting to win. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Logan registered several things in quick succession: that she had clearly been crying, that she was working on what looked like at least her second or third glass, and that she was looking at him with an expression that was trying very hard to become composed, and not quite getting there. "Reed," she said. "Miss Sinclair." Another pause. "I left something," he said, lifting the folder, which was technically true. "On my desk. I had to come back for it. On Christmas Eve. Kids wanted me to read the files as a bedtime story. Educational household." Something moved across her face that might have been the beginning of a smile, except it didn't finish. She looked back down at the glass in her hand, and Logan watched her thumb trace the edge of it the way people did when they were somewhere far away. "You can go," she said, not dismissively, just flat. "Sure," he said. He didn't go. He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe instead, because he was already here and the snow was coming down harder outside, and something about the scene in front of him felt wrong to walk away from. Not dangerous, just wrong. The particular wrongness of a person being more alone than they should be. "You want me to call someone?" he asked. "There's no one to call." It was such a simple answer, delivered with such complete absence of self-pity, that it landed harder than anything dramatic would have. Logan felt it somewhere behind his sternum. "Okay," he said. "You have a driver?" "I gave him the night off. Family nearby." She gave him a look. It wasn't unfriendly exactly, more tired. "I said there's no one to call, Reed. I wasn't being poetic." "Right." He pushed off the doorframe and came into the kitchen properly. "Scoot over." She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The floor." He gestured at the stretch of tile beside her. "Scoot over a little. My back's not great. I need the cabinet." "You want to sit on the floor." "You're sitting on the floor." "I'm the CEO." "And clearly it's working out great," he said, nodding at the whiskey bottle. She stared at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. Then, slowly, she shifted 6 inches to the left. Logan sat down beside her, back against the cabinet, legs stretched out. The floor was cold and the lighting was terrible, and somewhere far below them, the city was lit up with Christmas. He could see a sliver of it through the narrow window above the sink, red and white and gold against the dark. She didn't offer him the glass. He didn't ask for it. "Bad day?" he said. "Bad year," she said. "Those exist." She turned the glass slowly between her palms. "My board met today. Emergency session. Urgency. There's a petition to restructure leadership, which is a polite way of saying 3 of them want to remove me and install someone more." She paused, searching for the word. Comfortable. Comfortable. More like them. More willing to play the game the way it's always been played. She took a sip. "They haven't moved yet, but they're building toward it. You've handled board pressure before. Not like this." She said it quietly, without drama, and that was somehow the worst part. Not while everything else is also falling apart. Logan waited. He'd learned, mostly from the twins, that sometimes the right move was to just stay quiet. "My mother called me this morning," Ava said. "First time in 4 years. She wanted to tell me she's getting remarried. She wanted me to come to the wedding, as if—" She stopped. "As if 4 years of nothing is just a gap in the calendar that we all agree not to mention." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd think about it. which I won't.
She looked at the window. I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I couldn't just say no. Because it's your mother, he said. She walked out when I was 15. She came back twice, then left again. The third time I stopped counting. Her voice was even, factual, like she'd told this story enough times that the edges had worn smooth. I built everything I have because I decided that depending on other people was a liability. And I'm very successful and very alone on Christmas Eve sitting on a kitchen floor. So, she gestured vaguely. You can draw your own conclusions about how well that plan is working. Logan was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind picked up, and he could hear the soft percussion of snow against the window. I've got a 6-year-old who told me last week that my pasta tastes like cardboard, he said, and another one who cried for 45 minutes because I put her socks on in the wrong order. She turned her head to look at him.
Twins, he said. Mason and Lily. I've been raising them alone for 3 years. He paused. My wife left. Not dramatically. She just decided she didn't want the life we'd built. Packed up one Tuesday and filed the paperwork. Kids were 3. Ava was very still. So I get it, he said. Not the same, but the thing where you make yourself not need anybody because needing people is how you get hurt. I know that thing. She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her recalibrating. The way people did when they'd assumed something about you and then discovered it was wrong. He was used to it. People tended to see a 32-year-old guy in a mid-level finance role and fill in the rest themselves. How do you do it? She asked, not rhetorically. Actually asking. Badly, he said. Mostly, I make it up as I go and hope they don't notice. That almost smile again. This time it finished. Brief, real, arriving and departing quickly like it wasn't quite sure it belonged there. You should go, she said. It's Christmas Eve. Yeah. He checked his watch. You okay to get home? I'll get a car. I'll walk out with you. She looked at him like he'd said something strange. That's not necessary. I know. He stood up, offered her his hand. She looked at it for a second. Then she took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and she was steadier than he'd expected, given the whiskey. Her natural composure reasserting itself almost immediately, spine straightening, chin lifting. But she kept hold of his hand for just a second longer than the gesture required, then let go and reached for her shoes. They didn't talk much in the elevator. Logan held the door and she walked through the lobby in front of him, and the security guard at the front desk said, "Merry Christmas, Ms. Sinclair," in the practiced way of someone accustomed to speaking into a void. And Ava said, "Merry Christmas, Gerald," back. And Logan noticed she'd said his name, which was something. Outside, it was full winter. The snow was coming down in that particular thick, committed way that meant morning was going to be serious business for anyone who owned a shovel. Weston Avenue was quiet. The city had emptied out hours ago, everyone already home or already somewhere else. The streetlights turned everything soft and orange, and the snow on the sidewalk was unbroken except for a single set of footprints heading east. They stood under the building's awning, and she opened her app to request a car. 14 minutes, she said, looking at the screen. Christmas Eve surge pricing. She said it without inflection, like it was simply a data point. Where do you live? He asked. Kellner Street, about 12 blocks north. He looked at the snow, then at her, then at the empty street. I'll walk with you. Logan. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He wasn't sure either of them noticed it in the moment. You have children waiting for you. I have a sister watching my children who is fully capable of handling bedtime and is probably already on her second glass of wine. He looked at her sideways. And you've had 3 whiskeys and it's icy, and I'd feel worse going home than staying. She studied him with that measuring expression she used in meetings, the one that felt like she was calculating the precise value of what she was looking at. Then she put her phone away. 12 blocks, she said. 12 blocks, he confirmed. They stepped out into the snow. Logan had walked through this part of the city hundreds of times. It was different now, quieter than he'd ever heard it, the traffic down to almost nothing, the usual noise of the city muffled under the weight of the snow. Their footsteps were the loudest things around. Somewhere a few blocks over, somebody was playing music, something slow and instrumental. nothing he recognized, drifting out from a lit window above a closed restaurant. "You've been at the company 2 years," Ava said. It wasn't quite a question. 2 years and 4 months. You were headhunted. You have a good memory. I read every hire file, she said. Prior to my tenure, the company had a habit of bringing in people based on relationships and comfort rather than capacity. I changed that. She paused. You came from Aldrich Group. You were managing their mid-market portfolio analysis. And I was bored out of my mind, he said. The work was good, but the culture was institutional. Not a lot of room to actually think. You think at Sinclair Capital? More than I used to. He glanced at her. Your Q3 framework, the restructuring of how we evaluate acquisition targets, that changed how I approached the whole job. She looked at him with something careful in her expression, like she wasn't sure if he was saying what she thought he was saying. Most people found that restructuring disruptive. It was disruptive. That was the point of it. She was quiet for a moment. You submitted feedback on it, in the internal review system. You read that? I read everything. He laughed. A short, genuine sound. Was the feedback useful, or did I come across as insufferable? Both, actually. She said it evenly, but there was something underneath it. You were right about the lag problem in the secondary metrics. I implemented a version of your suggestion in the revised model. He hadn't known that. He'd assumed the feedback had gone into a folder somewhere and been forgotten. You never mentioned it. It's a suggestion system. I'm not obligated to credit every contributor. Fair. But it was good thinking. He felt the weight of that coming from her. Ava Sinclair was not a person who gave compliments carelessly. He filed it away and said nothing. They crossed an intersection where a traffic light swung on its cable in the wind, red and green alternating against the snow. The cab moved slowly through the slush, the only car on the block. On the corner, a bodega was still open, its windows fogged and warm-looking, a string of plastic holiday lights taped crookedly above the door. Can I ask you something? Logan said. You can ask. What made you stay in the office tonight? You could have gone anywhere. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, it's the place where I know what I'm doing. He understood that immediately, more than he expected to. Yeah. At the office, I'm competent. I know my role, I know what's expected of me, and I know how to deliver it. She looked straight ahead. Everywhere else I seem to... She didn't finish the sentence. Fumble? He offered. I was going to say struggle, she said, a little dry. But yes. I think that's pretty human, actually. I'm not known for being particularly human. Who told you that? She glanced at him sideways. It's a general consensus. I sat on a kitchen floor with you for 20 minutes and you told me about your mother, he said. That's pretty human. She looked away again. The snow was catching in her hair. She'd left her coat unbuttoned at the collar and the cold was coloring her cheeks, and she looked different out here than she did in the office. Not less like herself exactly. More like a version of herself that hadn't been edited yet. I don't usually talk about that, she said. I know. I'm not sure why I did. Whiskey, he said, and a captive audience. You could have left. I know. She looked at him then and held the look for a beat longer than was comfortable, and Logan found that he didn't look away either. Something in the air between them was different from the kitchen floor, and he was aware of it without entirely knowing what to do with it. He looked back at the street. Tell me about your kids, she said, and her voice was softer now, less precise, like she was asking because she actually wanted to know, not because it was the polite thing to do. So he told her. He told her about Mason, who was all energy and questions and had recently announced his intention to become a paleontologist because dinosaurs were, in his words, the best accident that ever happened. He told her about Lily, who was quieter and more interior, who had opinions about color and arrangement and kept reorganizing the bookshelves in the apartment into systems that she refused to fully explain. He told her about the particular chaos of Christmas morning when they were smaller, when they'd both wake before 6 and come crashing into his room like disaster, and how even half awake and exhausted he'd felt something he didn't have a word for, something close to the feeling of having exactly what you were supposed to have, even when it was too loud and too much and you hadn't had enough coffee. Ava listened. She didn't interrupt. She asked one question, What did Lily decide about the bookshelves? And seemed genuinely interested in the answer, which was that Lily had organized them by emotional tone, a concept she'd developed entirely on her own and could not adequately explain to anyone else. That's remarkable, Ava said. She's 6. Still remarkable. She'd probably like you, he said, then heard how that sounded and was not entirely sure how to walk it back, so he just left it there. Ava didn't say anything to it, but she didn't look away either. They were somewhere around the 8th block when the snow picked up suddenly, going from pleasant to serious in under a minute. Logan caught Ava's elbow when she slipped on a patch of ice near a drainage grate, and then they were closer together than they'd been, and neither of them stepped apart right away. She looked up at him. Her face was close, snow in her eyelashes. The amber light from a restaurant window across the street fell across one side of her face and made everything warm. She smelled like whiskey and something dry and clean underneath it. Cedar, maybe, or something like it. He was aware, very acutely, of every sensible reason to step back. He was also aware very acutely that he didn't want to. She closed the last few inches. The kiss was brief and cold and real. No hesitation from her, which surprised him more than the kiss itself. Her hand came up to his coat briefly, fingers catching at the lapel, then letting go. She pulled back and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Somewhere between the thing she'd clearly felt and the thing she was already beginning to second-guess. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. I'm not. I don't do this. I know." It was fine, he said gently. It was more than fine. She looked at him for another moment, then looked away, and the particular way she composed herself, pulling the edges of herself back into order, made something in his chest ache in a way he hadn't expected. "You've had a long night," he said. "I've had a long night, and you're—" He paused carefully. "I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen, but you had 3 drinks, and I don't want you to wake up tomorrow and feel like you made a mistake." She was quiet for a moment. "That's very—" She seemed to be looking for the word. "Annoying?" he offered. "I was going to say considerate. I can be both." Something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, but close to it, and warmer than the almost smiles from before. "You probably can." They stood there in the snow for a moment more. Then he said, "Come home with me." She blinked. "For Christmas," he said. "Tonight, I mean. My sister's there. The kids will be losing their minds. It's loud, and it smells like cinnamon, and my sister probably burned something." He paused. "You said there's nobody to go home to." "Logan, I'm not saying it as a... It's just Christmas. And you're standing in the snow, and my kids will adopt literally anyone who pays them the slightest attention." He looked at her steadily. "You don't have to be alone tonight." She stared at him for a long time. The snow was coming down between them, soft and indifferent. Her expression went through something complicated that he couldn't follow entirely, and he realized that for someone who controlled her face as completely as Ava Sinclair usually did, the fact that he could see it move at all was something. "I wouldn't want to intrude," she said. "You wouldn't be. I don't know your family." "My family doesn't know you either. They'll fix that in about 4 minutes," loudly. He looked at her. "Come on, it's Christmas." She looked down at the sidewalk. Then she looked up at him. And something in her expression shifted into something quieter, something less defended, and she said quietly, "Okay." "Okay," he said. And they turned together and walked the rest of the way through the snow, not saying much, the city bright and cold around them, the holiday humming in the windows above the empty streets. Logan's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Caldwell Street that had been built in the 70s and not substantially updated since, which meant the hallway always smelled faintly of carpet and cooking from the other apartments, and the elevator was technically functional but rarely trustworthy, and the radiators knocked at night in a rhythm that Logan's kids had named Harold, for reasons they could not fully articulate. He had stopped thinking about any of this as a flaw approximately 18 months ago. This was his place. These were his walls. He unlocked the door and sound poured out immediately. Not yelling, but the particular saturated noise of 2 6-year-olds at maximum energy in a confined space, overlaid with Deborah's voice saying something that he caught the tail end of, which included the phrase, "Absolutely not. That is a decoration. It goes on the tree." He stepped inside and Ava followed. Deborah appeared at the end of the hall, holding a half-eaten candy cane in one hand and the specific expression of a woman who has been managing children for 3 hours and has just arrived at her limit. She saw Logan. Then she saw Ava. Her expression shifted through 3 things in very rapid succession. "You're home," she said to Logan. Then, "You brought someone." "This is Ava," he said. "She needed somewhere to be tonight. I told her this was somewhere." Deborah looked at Ava. Then she said, with the complete practicality of someone who had no energy left for ceremony, "Are you hungry? Because I burned the first batch of cookies and the second batch is better, but we've been eating them for 40 minutes, so you have to be fast." Ava paused. "Yes, thank you." Then the hallway exploded. Mason came around this corner at a full run and stopped dead when he saw a stranger in the hall, which created a brief pile-up because Lily was right behind him and ran directly into his back. There was a moment of untangling, and then both of them stood in the hallway looking at Ava with the wide, completely unguarded assessment of young children who have not yet learned to pretend they aren't studying you. "Who are you?" Mason said. "Mason," Logan said. "I'm just asking." "My name is Ava," she said. She crouched down, not awkwardly, but deliberately, bringing herself to their level, and Logan noticed she didn't do it in the way adults often did, with exaggerated warmth or the specific sing-song tone people used with kids they didn't know. She just leveled, like they were people she was meeting, which they were. "I know your dad from work." Mason considered this. "Do you know about the Cretaceous period?" "Mason is into dinosaurs," Logan said. "I know some things about it," Ava said carefully, "though I suspect you know more than I do." This was apparently the exact right answer. Mason's whole posture changed. "Okay," he said. "I can tell you stuff." Lily, meanwhile, was looking at Ava with a more serious and searching expression. "Your coat is really nice," she said. "Thank you." "It matches the walls in the third hallway at Dad's office." Lily said it like an observation, like a fact she was filing for later. "He showed us pictures once." Ava looked up at Logan briefly, something in her expression that was a little soft at the edges. "That's very observant," she said. "I notice things," Lily said simply. "So do I," said Ava. "Maybe we have something in common." Lily thought about this very seriously. Then she said, "Come see what I did with the living room." And that was how Ava Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Capital, found herself being led by the hand by a 6-year-old through a third-floor apartment on Caldwell Street at 8:10 on Christmas Eve to see the arrangement of the bookshelf. Logan stood in the hallway and watched her go. Deborah appeared at his elbow. "Okay," she said under her breath, with the very specific tone she used when she was choosing to be restrained. "She's your boss." "She is." "She was alone on Christmas Eve." "She was." "And you?" "Deborah." "I'm just noting the sequence of events." "I know what you're doing." "She's also quite beautiful," Deborah said, in the way of someone entering evidence into a record. "Go watch your cookies," Logan said. From the living room, he could hear Lily explaining her organizational system. "This section is books that make you feel like you're outside. And this section is books that are mostly about things nobody tells you." And he could hear Ava listening, asking questions, the exact right questions, the kind that made it clear she wasn't just being polite. Mason materialized at Logan's side, holding a candy cane and looking in the same direction. "She's cool," he said. "Don't eat all the candy canes," Logan said. "I only had 4. Mason, that's a lot of candy canes." "They're small." Logan put his hand on his son's head and ruffled his hair, and Mason squirmed and laughed, and from the living room Ava said something that made Lily laugh, a real laugh, the kind Lily saved, which was not frequent. And Logan felt something move in his chest that he didn't have a clear name for yet. He'd sort it out later. For now there were cookies, badly burned on the bottom, and still warm, and his kids were up way past their bedtime, and snow was piling up on the window ledge outside. And somewhere in his living room, a woman he barely knew was sitting on the floor with his daughter looking at a bookshelf and asking questions like the answers mattered. It was, he thought, a strange Christmas Eve. It was also, he thought, a good one. Outside, the snow kept coming down, blanketing the city in white, covering the footprints they'd left on the street, erasing the evidence of the walk as though it had never happened. Except that it had, and both of them knew it, and some things, once they start, don't stop just because the snow covered them over. Deborah left around midnight after the cookies were mostly gone and both kids had crashed. Mason on the couch with his shoes still on and a candy cane wrapper stuck to his cheek. Lily in her bed with the light still on and a library book open across her chest. Logan carried Mason to his room first, then went back for the book and the light. And when he came back to the living room, Ava was still there, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch, her heels off, her good coat folded over the armrest, holding a mug of tea that Deborah had pressed on her on the way out the door. She looked comfortable in a way Logan hadn't expected. Not relaxed exactly. Ava Sinclair didn't fully relax. He was already getting a sense of that. But settled. Present. Like she'd stopped running the calculation of where she was supposed to be. "You don't have to stay," he said, coming back into the room. "I know." She looked up at him. "Is that your way of asking me to leave?" "No." He sat down in the armchair across from her. "It's my way of making sure you know you have options." "I'm aware I have options. I'm choosing this one." She looked at the mug. "Your sister is intense." "She is. She asked me 6 questions in the kitchen while I was getting tea. I think she was running a background check." "She was," Logan said. "She's been doing that to anyone I bring around since my ex left. She's protective." "I'm not..." Ava paused. "I'm not anyone you brought around. Not in that sense." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "But Deborah doesn't really do categories." Ava was quiet for a moment. She turned the mug in her hands. "She asked me if I was the kind of person who shows up and then disappears." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I wasn't sure." She said it simply, without apology. It felt like the honest answer. Logan thought about that. "That is the honest answer," he said. They sat with it for a minute. The apartment was quiet now. Harold the radiator knocking softly in the rhythm the kids had named him for, the snow still visible through the window, the city below them muffled and dark. "Mason told me about his dinosaur book," she said. "Before he fell asleep. He explained the entire extinction event to me in about 4 minutes." A small pause. "He's very thorough. He has a lot of feelings about the asteroid. He said it was, quote, deeply unfair. He's been saying that for about 8 months. Logan almost smiled. He wrote a letter about it. To whom? He wasn't clear on that. We addressed it to the universe. Ava looked at him, and there it was again. That thing that wasn't quite a smile but kept getting closer to one, like it was finding its range. Did the universe respond? Not yet. He checks the mailbox, though. She laughed. It was a short sound, a little surprised, like she hadn't planned on it. And it changed her face entirely, opened something in it that wasn't usually accessible. Logan watched it happen and looked away before she could notice him noticing. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "Okay. I mean it this time." "You've said it twice. 3rd time's probably the one." She looked at him. He looked back. The lamp on the side table threw a warm circle of light across the floor between them, and outside the window the snow was still falling, soft and indifferent, and the moment stretched in a way that was not uncomfortable but was definitely something. "The kiss," she said. "Yeah. I want to be clear that I'm not someone who does that." She looked at the mug. "I'm your employer. That's not something I take lightly." "I know. And I had been drinking." "I know that too." "I'm not saying it didn't..." She stopped, restarted. "I'm not saying it meant nothing. I'm saying I can't afford to be impulsive about it." Logan leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees. "Ava, I'm not expecting anything from tonight. You were alone on Christmas Eve. I offered you somewhere to be. That's what happened." He held her gaze. "The other thing can just be something that happened in the snow. We don't have to make it into more than that." She studied him for a long moment, with the particular focused attention that probably read as intimidating in a boardroom, and here just felt like she was actually looking at him. "You're very reasonable," she said, and made it sound slightly like an accusation. "I have kids," he said. "I don't have the energy to be unreasonable." She uncurled from the floor carefully, found her heels, and put them on while still standing, which required balance and apparently didn't require effort. She reached for her coat. Logan stood too, and they were closer than they'd been standing in any of the rooms tonight, close enough that he could see she was tired in a way the evening had only partially addressed, the kind of tired that a single good night doesn't fix. "Thank you," she said, "for the kitchen floor, and the walk, and—" She looked back at the living room briefly. "This. Sure. I mean it. I know you do." She looked up at him one more time. There was something in her expression that was carefully not asking for anything, the way people looked when they'd trained themselves not to want things they weren't sure they'd get. Then she left. He heard the elevator doors close and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the snow. Orc. The first week of January arrived with the particular brutal practicality of the new year. Cold, undecorated, full of emails that had piled up over the break, and a board agenda that Logan heard about through the company-wide calendar update and did not ask questions about. Ava was back in her office as if Christmas Eve had never happened, which it had, and Logan was back at his desk as if he hadn't spent the holiday thinking about a woman he had absolutely no business thinking about. They passed each other in the hall on the third morning back. She said, "Read," in the same even tone she used for everything, and he said, "Morning," and that was that. Except 2 hours later, she sent him an email. "The Whitmore analysis you submitted before the break had a strong methodology. I forwarded it to the restructuring team." As he sat with that email for a few minutes, then he wrote back, "Appreciate it. Hope your new year was good." He hovered over the send button for 3 seconds, then added, "Mason mailed his second letter to the universe." He deleted that. Then he put it back. Then he sent it. Her reply came 47 minutes later. She had clearly been in meetings. Did the universe respond this time? He smiled at his screen like an idiot and hoped no one saw him. Still pending, he typed back, "He's optimistic. Nothing for another 2 hours." Then, "That's a good quality to have. It was a small thing, a completely minor exchange." Logan told himself that and mostly believed it, except that he found himself looking at the thread twice more before end of day, which was not the behavior of a person for whom something was completely minor. They didn't arrange anything, no coffee, no meeting, no structured reason to be in the same space. But the building had a way of creating intersections. The coffee machine on 28, where Logan went when the one on 31 was out of the dark roast, the parking structure elevator that served multiple floors, the lobby at the exact moment a morning rainstorm made everyone stop before heading out. Twice in the first 2 weeks of January, Logan ended up somewhere unexpected and found Ava already there. The first time was the coffee machine. She was standing at it when he came around the corner, and she turned and saw him and said, without preamble, "This one's also out of the dark roast." "Of course it is. There's a decent place on Fillmore. I know it. I'm going in about 15 minutes if you—" She stopped, recalibrated. "If you wanted to walk—" He looked at her. She was looking at the middle distance, not quite at him, with the particular controlled expression of someone who had just offered something small and was already preparing to be fine if it was declined. "Yeah," he said. "Sure." They walked. It was cold, nothing like Christmas Eve, bright and sharp and practical. They talked about the Whitmore project, and then about the board restructuring proposal, and then, gradually, about nothing professional at all. She asked how the twins had been since the break. He told her Mason had started a dinosaur journal, and Lily had rearranged her bedroom twice in 10 days, and was apparently not finished. Ava listened with the same focused quality she brought to everything, asking questions that proved she'd been paying attention. "Do you always remember details like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "I mentioned Lily reorganizes things. That was weeks ago. You asked about it specifically." "I told you," she said. "I pay attention. Most people don't. Most people are listening for a gap in the conversation so they can talk." She said it without bitterness, just observation. "I actually want to know what people are telling me. At the coffee place on Fillmore, the woman behind the counter knew Ava's order, which told Logan she came here often and alone, and tipped well because the woman smiled at her like she meant it, not like she was performing good service. He paid for his own coffee before Ava could, and she looked at him sideways. "You didn't have to do that. You're not buying my coffee. I make significantly more than you. That's got nothing to do with it." She considered that for a moment, then let it go. They walked back slower than they'd come out. The second unexpected intersection was the parking elevator, a Wednesday afternoon, both of them leaving later than everyone else because they were both the kind of people who stayed late. Logan was on his phone trying to work out a pickup schedule change with Deborah when the elevator opened and Ava was inside, and there was a half-second moment where they both registered the situation, and then he stepped in and the doors closed and Deborah was still in his ear. "Hang on a second," he told her. Then, to Ava, "Sorry. You're fine." He finished the call quickly, sorted the pickup, put the phone away. The elevator was slow. They stood side by side in the small space and said nothing, and it was not uncomfortable. "Late again," she said. "Board prep?" "Always." She exhaled. "Kellerman is building a coalition. 3 board members, possibly 4. They're not ready to move yet, but they will be by the spring meeting." Logan looked at her profile. She was looking at the floor display, watching the numbers. "What are you going to do?" "Work." She said it simply. "Do what I do. Be better than whatever they're planning." "Is that usually enough?" She was quiet for a moment. "It's been enough before." "This time?" She looked at him then. In the small space of the elevator, close enough that he could see the tiredness she was carrying, the particular weight of someone who fought the same fight every morning and showed up for it anyway. "I don't know," she said. "Ask me in April." The elevator opened and they walked to their respective cars, and Logan drove home and thought about that. "I don't know." And the fact that she'd said it, which she wouldn't have 2 months ago. The coffee runs became a pattern without either of them deciding that. Twice a week, then 3 times, slipping into the schedule the way things slipped in when neither person wanted to name what they were doing. They talked about work, about the board situation, about his kids, about nothing, about everything that came up. He found out she'd taught herself to cook during the lockdown years from YouTube videos and was decent at exactly 4 dishes and hopeless at everything else. She found out he'd run a half marathon 2 years ago and hadn't run since because training with twins in the apartment was logistically impossible, and he'd given up and was mildly annoyed about it. "Train in the morning before they're up," she said. "They're up at 5:30. Train at 5. That's not a time a human being should be awake. I'm usually up by 5:15. He looked at her. "That's not the flex you think it is." She almost laughed. They discovered over the course of 3 separate coffee conversations that they had deeply opposing views on cold weather, parallel parking, and whether it was acceptable to skip the last 15 minutes of a movie once you knew how it ended. Logan said yes, obviously. Ava said no, that the ending was the point and leaving early was a form of cowardice. Logan said calling movie-leaving cowardice was a reach. Ava said he could disagree all he wanted. He was still wrong. He found that he liked arguing with her. She was sharp and precise and didn't back down when she believed she was right, but she also didn't argue for the sake of it. If he made a point that landed, she acknowledged it. She didn't always concede out loud, but he could see it in the way she shifted tack, the way a good debater does when the ground has moved. The first time he realized he was in real trouble was on a Thursday evening in the second week of February. He was picking up the kids from Deborah's, juggling them and their backpacks and Lily's drawings, which she'd done at Deborah's, and was protective of to the point of refusing to allow anyone else to carry them. They got into the elevator in Deborah's building, and Mason said, completely unprompted, "Is the lady coming over again?" "What lady?" "The one from Christmas, Ava." "No. Why?" "She was nice." Mason said it with the absolute simplicity of 6. "She knew about the asteroid." "Lots of people know about the asteroid." "But she knew the part about the species that survived." He thought about it. "She knew the interesting part." Logan looked at his son, who was holding a candy cane he'd extracted from somewhere on his person. Where, Logan did not want to know. And chewing it with complete contentment, and he thought about a woman sitting on his floor asking the right questions, and he thought about an elevator in a parking structure, and I don't know, ask me in April, and he thought about a laugh that came out surprised, like it had escaped. Put that away, he told Mason. You're going to ruin your dinner. It's almost gone. Mason. Fine. Lily looked up from her drawings. I want to show her my new one, she said. The one with the colors that feel like Tuesday. Tuesday doesn't have a color, Mason said. Yes, it does. Lily said it with absolute conviction. It's a kind of gray-blue. Not sad, just careful. She thought about it. Ava would get it. Logan pressed the lobby button and said nothing, and tried to figure out when his children had apparently decided this woman was a fixture of their world based on one Christmas Eve, and whether the fact that he wasn't entirely sure he disagreed with them was something he should be concerned about. He texted Ava that night, after the kids were down. Just a picture. Lily's drawing, the gray-blue Tuesday one, with a note. Lily says you'd understand this one. 3 minutes. Then, the color is right. Tuesday does feel like that. He stared at his phone in the dark kitchen for a while. Then he texted back. Coffee tomorrow, 7:30, she wrote. Fillmore. I'll be there. And he was. And she was already waiting, which he'd started to notice was how it usually went. Ava arrived early to everything, not to establish dominance, but because waiting for people made her anxious in a way she'd mentioned once and then not mentioned again, and he'd filed it away as one of the things that were true about her that had nothing to do with the woman in the Financial Journal photo in the lobby. They stood outside Fillmore with their cups, and she told him about a board email she'd received that morning that was politely threatening in the specific way of people who had lawyers and didn't need to be impolite. And he told her about Mason's dinosaur journal, which had now expanded to include a section titled Injustices and contained the asteroid, losing a sock, and a substitute teacher who had mispronounced Triceratops. He spelled injustices correctly? She asked. He did not, Logan said. But the intent was clear. She was laughing when she looked at him. A real laugh, not the short, surprised ones, but a full one that took over her face and made her look younger and less defended and entirely herself in a way that was different from any version of her he'd seen before. He felt it. The whole thing. All at once. She caught him looking, and the laugh faded at the edges, not gone, but changed, and something moved between them on the February sidewalk that they didn't name but both felt, and she looked at her cup and said, We should get back. And he said, Yeah. And they walked back side by side through the cold morning, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, neither of them closing the last inch, neither of them moving away. That was February. March was different only in that they both knew what was happening and neither said so, which was its own kind of intimacy. The shared awareness of something growing in the space where they were still pretending to be careful. Late-night texts about nothing. A Saturday morning where he mentioned he was taking the kids to the Natural History Museum, and she showed up, not because he'd asked her to, but because Mason had apparently sent her a very direct message through Logan's phone, asking if she wanted to come, and Logan hadn't caught it in time to stop it, and she had said yes without hesitation. She spent 4 hours in that museum with his kids, and she was not natural with them, not immediately, not the way some adults were, but earnest, genuinely curious about what they wanted to show her, willing to stand in front of the same diorama for 10 minutes while Mason explained everything wrong with the fossil reconstruction, willing to sit on the museum floor while Lily arranged their lunch wrappers into a color system and explained the logic. On the drive home, Mason fell asleep, and Lily sat in the back quietly looking at the window, and Ava was in the passenger seat not saying anything, and Logan glanced at her once and saw her looking at the skyline with an expression that was quiet and full and a little raw, and he looked back at the road. Thank you for today, she said, finally. Mason invited you. Thank him. I know. A pause. I meant... She stopped, started again. I don't usually have days like this. Like what? Where I'm not... She looked at her hands. Where I'm just somewhere. Not performing. Not managing anything. Just somewhere. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that's what they do. The kids. They don't leave you a lot of room to be anything except present. Is that exhausting? Sometimes, he said. Also the best part. She was quiet the rest of the way. When he pulled up to drop her off, she sat for a moment before getting out, and then she turned and looked at him directly. And the thing between them that neither of them had named was right there in the car with them, solid and patient. "Logan," she said. "I know," he said. She nodded once, like something had been confirmed. Then she got out and walked to her building, and he watched her go, and Lily said from the back seat, "She's going to come back," with the certainty of someone who had decided something and was simply reporting the facts. "Maybe," he said. "She will," Lily said, and fell asleep leaning against the window. Logan drove home through the early evening, the city lit up and moving around him, and didn't try to make himself believe it wasn't already happening. Because it was. It had been for months, and the only question left was what they were going to do about it. They didn't talk about it directly for another 2 weeks after the museum, which was a decision neither of them made consciously, and both of them felt the weight of. The thing between them had a shape now. They could both feel the edges of it, but naming it meant dealing with the parts that were complicated, and there were a lot of parts that were complicated. Then on a Tuesday night in the middle of March, Ava texted him at 10:43. "Are you up?" He was doing dishes. "Yeah, what's wrong?" "Nothing, a pause. Can I call you?" She'd never asked to call before. They texted. That was the medium they'd established for the space between seeing each other. He dried his hands on the dish towel and said, "Call me." She did. "Hey," she said. Her voice sounded different on the phone. More unguarded somehow, like the visual component of composure was part of how she held herself together. "Hey!" He leaned against the counter. "What's going on?" She called again, my mother. A beat. This time she didn't ask about the wedding. She just called. Said she wanted to talk. Said she was sorry. He could hear her moving around, the sound of her apartment behind her. She said it like it was a sentence, like sorry was a complete thought. "Is it?" "No." Flat and certain. "Sorry doesn't..." She stopped. She was gone for 15 years with gaps. She showed up when things were going well and disappeared when they got hard. Sorry doesn't account for any of that. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." But I stayed on the phone for 40 minutes. Her voice was tighter now, frustrated with herself. "I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I keep..." She exhaled. "Every time she reaches out, I tell myself I'm not going to engage, and then I engage for 40 minutes. Because she's your mother. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true." She was quiet. He could hear her sitting down somewhere. "She wants to have dinner," Ava said. "Next week. She's in the city. Do you want to go?" "No." Then, "I don't know." Then quieter. "Maybe?" "Those aren't the same answer." "I'm aware." A short pause. "What would you do?" Logan thought about it honestly, not reflexively. "I'd probably go," he said. "Not because I thought it would fix anything, but because not going means she takes up more space in my head than going does. The imaginary conversation is always worse than the real one." Silence. Then, "That's annoyingly reasonable. I have a talent." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "Will you..." She stopped. "What?" "Will you just stay on the phone for a little while? You don't have to say anything. She trailed off, and he understood that she was not accustomed to asking for this kind of thing, that the ask itself had cost her something small and real. "Yeah," he said. "I'm here." He finished the dishes one-handed, phone tucked against his shoulder, and they talked sometimes and didn't talk sometimes, and around midnight she said she was going to try to sleep, and he said okay, and she said goodnight, and he said goodnight, and then neither of them hung up for another minute, and then she did. He stood in his quiet kitchen holding the phone. He was, he knew, in it completely. Had been for a while. The question was what they were going to do with that fact. He didn't sleep particularly well. She went to dinner with her mother on a Thursday. Logan knew because she'd mentioned it the day before in the kind of offhand way that meant it was occupying most of her mental space. He texted her at 8 that evening. "How's it going? Nothing for 2 hours." Then, at 10:15, I'm outside. Can I come over? He looked at the message for exactly 4 seconds. Yes. I'll unlock the door. She arrived 20 minutes later looking like she'd walked the whole way, which she probably had. She walked when she needed to burn something off. He'd learned that about her. Her hair was down, which was unusual. She normally wore it up for anything resembling a formal occasion. She'd been crying, which he could see from across the room, and which she did not mention. He handed her a glass of water without commentary. She took it, drank half of it, and sat on the couch. The apartment was quiet. The kids were at Deborah's overnight. She brought her fiancé, Ava said, to the dinner where she was supposed to apologize. Yes. Her voice was even, but her hands weren't quite. His name is Patrick. He's perfectly fine. That's not the issue. She looked at the glass. She spent the first 20 minutes telling me about the wedding plans and the venue and the flowers, and then she told me she was hoping I'd come and say a few words, and I asked her what words she thought I'd have to say, and she got upset. She got upset. She said I was being cold, that I never let anything go. Ava's jaw tightened briefly. She said the issue was that I always needed to be the one who was wronged. Logan didn't say anything. He let that sit in the room where it needed to sit. I asked her when she left the first time, Ava said. I asked her, because I've never actually asked. I've always just processed it internally and moved on. I asked her why. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said she needed to find herself. Ava paused. I was 15. I needed a parent, and she needed to find herself. Ava. I'm not. She held up a hand, stopping something she didn't want stopped. I'm not falling apart about it. I said it out loud tonight for the first time. I asked her the actual question and got the actual answer, and the answer was that finding herself was more important than staying. She looked at him then. Her eyes were dry now, but the rawness was still there. I told her I wouldn't come to the wedding. I told her I needed to stop having the same conversation every 3 years where she apologizes, and I say I'll think about it and nothing changes. Her voice was steady, steadier than it had a right to be. I told her I wished her well, and I meant it, and then I left. Logan moved from the chair to the couch, not touching her, just closer. That took a lot, he said. It took everything, she said quietly. It felt like she thought about it, like setting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was heavy. That's what it is. She turned to look at him. The lamp behind him put her in shadow, but he could see her face clearly, the exhaustion, and underneath the exhaustion, something that might have been the beginning of relief. I kept thinking about what you said, about the imaginary conversation being worse. Was it? No, she said. The real one was worse, but it was also over, conclusively over. A pause. That's something. That's a lot, he said. They sat in the quiet for a moment. Then she said, How do you do it? The thing where you let people in even after they've hurt you. I'm not sure I do, he said honestly. I spent about 2 years after Claire left making sure nobody could get close enough to cause damage. He paused. I was very good at it. What changed? He looked at her. She looked back. The kids needed me to stop, he said. Kids don't let you hide inside yourself for very long. They need too much. He paused. And then eventually, other things. She held his gaze for a moment. The room was very quiet. Logan, she said, and it was the way she'd said his name in the elevator. Specific, deliberate, like she was using it to mean something beyond his name. I know, he said. She kissed him this time with none of the hesitation of the snow. No whiskey, no almost, no pulling back. Just direct and certain, the way she did everything when she'd decided. He felt it in his chest like something unlocking. When they separated, she stayed close, her forehead nearly against his, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. This is complicated, she said. Very. I'm still your employer. You are. That's a real problem. Yes, he said. It is. She pulled back far enough to look at him properly. Her expression was clear-eyed, not romantic, or not just romantic. She was thinking about it the way she thought about everything, with the particular quality of someone who needed to understand what they were getting into before they got into it. I don't want to be reckless about this. About you. She paused. About the kids. The fact that she included the kids made something in him settle deeply. Neither do I. So we're careful. We're careful, he agreed. It was not a complete plan, but for the moment it was something to stand on, and they both knew it. April arrived, and with it the board meeting Ava had been preparing for since January. Logan knew about it the way everyone in the company knew. The calendar had been blocked, the executive assistants were tense, the 31st floor ran at a different frequency that week. He didn't see much of Ava in the days leading up to it. She disappeared into the kind of preparation that meant early mornings, late evenings, and not a lot of room for anything else. He texted her the morning of, "You've been doing this for 4 years. They haven't beaten you yet." She texted back 3 hours later. "The meeting ran 6 hours. I'll tell you about it tonight." He cooked dinner. Actual dinner, not the pasta the kids had opinions about. He made the chicken thing Deborah had taught him that required more steps than he usually had patience for, because Ava had mentioned once that she'd been eating takeout for 8 days straight, and that was not nothing. He dropped the kids at Deborah's and texted her the address because she'd never been to his apartment when the kids weren't home, and that was different, and they both knew it was different, and he figured feeding her was a reasonable way to establish that the difference wasn't something to be alarmed about. She arrived at 7:30, looking like 6 hours in a boardroom looked put together on the surface, undone underneath. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the kitchen. "You cooked," she said. "Deborah did, technically. I followed instructions." She sat at the kitchen table, and he put food in front of her, and she ate like someone who'd forgotten to eat since morning, which she probably had. He sat across from her and waited. She told him about the board meeting between bites, and the story came out in pieces. Kellerman with his coalition of 4, the motion to restructure that hadn't quite passed, the 2-hour closed session where they'd laid out their concerns in the specific language of corporate governance that translated roughly to, "We think you're too autonomous and too young, and we want someone who will do what we say." She'd presented her Q1 results, which were strong. She'd presented the 5-year projections, which were stronger. She'd answered every question they had, and some they didn't know they were asking. The motion had failed. By 1 vote. 1, Logan said. Kellerman's coalition picked up a 4th member I hadn't anticipated. Her fork paused. But one of his original 3 abstained. Who? Miriam Voss. She said the name carefully. She's been on the board for 11 years. She and Kellerman have always been aligned. She looked at her plate. She told me after the meeting that she had daughters, that she thought about them when she was deciding. The room was quiet for a moment. That's something, Logan said. It's not permanent. Kellerman isn't done. She set her fork down. But I have time now. A few months at least before he regroups. She looked across the table at him, and the exhaustion in her face was real and unmanaged. I'm so tired of fighting for the thing I built. I know. I built it from nothing. I was 24 when I started and 26 when I took the CEO title, and I have spent 4 years proving to people who were already skeptical that I deserved to be there. Her voice wasn't angry, it was just worn. At some point, I want to just do the work without having to simultaneously justify my right to do it. You will, he said. Not yet, but you will. She looked at him. You sound very sure. I watched you run 6 months of preparation for a 6-hour meeting and come out on the winning side. I'm pretty sure. She held his gaze, and something in her expression shifted. The exhaustion still there, but something else coming through it. Something that looked like gratitude in the specific form it took when you weren't used to having someone in your corner. I think She stopped. What? She shook her head, not refusing to say it, more like she needed a second to let herself say it. I think I needed this. Tonight. Somebody who already knew before I got here. She paused. Somebody who didn't need me to explain. You don't have to explain anything to me. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. I know, she said. That's what I mean. They did the dishes together, which was domestic in a way that he didn't overthink, and she appeared to be working not to overthink,
And when they were done, she leaned against the counter and he leaned against the opposite counter, and they talked for another hour about nothing related to the board or the company, about a documentary she'd started watching, about Mason's latest Injustice Journal entry, which now included a classmate who had taken his eraser, about whether the radiator knocking at night actually sounded like a name. Harold, she said, testing it. That's what they decided. He does sound like a herald, actually. Don't tell them that, he said. They'll think they've won something. She laughed, and this time it wasn't surprised. It was just hers. It was the second week of April when it came apart. Logan was in a meeting on 28 when his phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. Do you know what's happening on 31? He didn't respond. But 20 minutes later, when the meeting ended, he could feel it. The particular atmospheric change of an office where something has happened. The way conversations went quiet when he walked by. The way two of the junior analysts looked at their screens too attentively. He found out from Marcus, who found out from someone in legal, who had been CC'd on an email that shouldn't have been sent as widely as it was. Someone on the board, nobody was certain who, but the name Kellerman was everywhere, had submitted a formal complaint to the governance committee. The complaint cited a potential conflict of interest, a senior employee in the financial analysis division, a pattern of meetings outside of professional context, a request for a formal inquiry into whether the CEO's judgment had been compromised. They knew about him and Ava. Logan sat at his desk and looked at the wall for approximately 90 seconds. Then he texted her. I heard. Are you okay? She didn't respond. That meant she was in meetings. He waited. She texted at 4:17. Can you come to my office at 5? Use the back elevator. He did. She was at her desk when he came in, the city behind her through the window, the afternoon light going gold and flat. She looked at him when he entered and said, Close the door, and he did. They're calling it a governance concern, she said. Her voice was controlled, too controlled. The complaint argues that a CEO relationship with a direct report creates conflicts of interest in performance evaluations, compensation decisions, and project assignments. She folded her hands on the desk. The governance committee has to respond. They're convening next week. What are the options? 2. She said it like she'd been over them several times already. One of us leaves the company, or we end the relationship. A pause. Kellerman is behind this. He can't beat me on performance, so he's coming at me sideways. Her jaw was set. It's elegant. I'll give him that. Logan sat in the chair across from her desk, the chair he'd sat in 30 times for scheduled meetings, and looked at her. What does your lawyer say? That a formal relationship between a CEO and a direct report is technically permissible under our current policy, but creates sufficient liability that the board has standing to require remediation. She looked at the desk, which means they have the leverage. They want you to fire me, he said, or end things. She met his eyes. They're not particular about which. He was quiet for a moment. There were things he needed to think about clearly, and he thought about them. His role at the company. His salary, which was not replaceable overnight with 2 kids in school. The pipeline of projects he was managing. His review cycle in June. All of it real, all of it significant. Also, the way she'd looked sitting on a museum floor with his daughter. The sound of her voice at midnight on the phone asking him to just stay on the line. The laugh that came out surprised, and then, eventually, just came out. I'm going to resign, he said. Logan, hear me out. He held up a hand, not sharply. You built this company. You've spent 4 years fighting to run it, and the work you're doing is real, and it matters. And Kellerman doesn't get to take it from you because of me. He looked at her steadily. I can find another job. I'm good at what I do. It'll take a few months, but I'll land somewhere. That's not... She stopped. Her composure was working hard. He could see it. I'm not going to let you sacrifice your career for... I'm not sacrificing anything. He kept his voice level. I'm making a choice. There's a difference. He looked at her. This isn't a negotiation, Ava. You're not going to talk me out of it. But I need you to hear me say it's my choice, not something being done to me. She looked at him for a long time. Her expression was doing several things at once.
the gratitude and the guilt and the specific frustrated helplessness of someone who was used to fixing problems and couldn't fix this one. "I don't want you to do this," she said. "I know. I hate that this is the situation." "So do I." "Kellerman is going to think he won something." "Kellerman wins the round," Logan said. "Not the fight. Those are different things." She pressed her lips together, looked at the window. "I'll make sure the severance is don't." He said it quietly, but clearly. "Don't make it a transaction. I don't want your severance package. I want to leave on my terms, with a clean record and a reference I can use, and I want this to be a choice I made, not something that happened to me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, tight. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They sat in the office where they'd had 30 professional meetings, and none of them like this one. And the city went orange outside the window, and Harold was somewhere far below them in the building knocking at his pipes, and neither of them said what they were both thinking about, which was what came next. Not the job, not the board, but the part where they were still whatever they were to each other on the other side of all of this. Logan stood up, straightened his jacket. "I'll have my resignation letter to HR by end of week." "Logan." She said his name the way she did when she meant it as more than his name. He stopped at the door. "I'm sorry," she said. Not like her mother had said it, not like a complete thought, like a beginning. "Don't be," he said. "This is just the part that's hard." He looked back at her. "There's still the part that isn't." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he opened the door and walked out, back through the hallway, and past the framed article in the lobby, and into the elevator and out into the April evening, where the city was doing what it always did, moving, continuous, indifferent. And he walked to his car and sat in it for a few minutes before starting the engine, not falling apart, just letting himself feel the weight of the thing before he had to figure out how to carry it. His phone buzzed. Lily. "Dad, when are you home?" She had recently discovered she could text him from Deborah's iPad, which had created a new dimension of communication. He typed back, "On my way, bug." 20 minutes. He started the car. He pulled out of the parking structure and into the traffic and pointed himself toward home, toward his kids, toward the things that didn't shift underneath him. Behind him, 42 floors up, a light burned in a corner office. The resignation letter was 4 sentences long. Logan had written longer grocery lists. He drafted 3 versions over 2 evenings. One that explained everything, one that said nothing, and a final one that landed somewhere clean and professional in between, thanking the company for the opportunity, citing personal reasons, requesting a transition period of 2 weeks. He submitted it on a Friday morning, and within the hour, his direct manager called him to ask if there was anything the company could do to change his mind. And Logan said no, politely and without detail, and that was that. The 2 weeks that followed were the particular kind of uncomfortable that came from everyone knowing something without anyone saying it. His colleagues were careful around him, not cold, just measured, like they weren't sure which way to hold the conversation. Marcus brought him coffee one morning without explanation and sat at the edge of his desk and said, "This is garbage, what happened?" And Logan said, "Oh, I made my choice." And Marcus said, "Still garbage." And they didn't talk about it again. He saw Ava twice in those 2 weeks, both times briefly, both times in professional contexts with other people present. She was composed and specific and said his name the same way she said everyone's name in a meeting, and he matched her register exactly because that was what the situation required. But on the last Wednesday, coming out of the copy room, they ended up alone in the hallway for 30 seconds, and she looked at him directly and said quietly, "How are you?" "Fine," he said. "How are you?" "Managing." She glanced down the hallway. Nobody coming. "I want to be clear that that what Kellerman did hasn't changed anything. For me. I know. I just needed to say it. I know that too." He looked at her. "We'll figure out the rest once I'm actually out." She nodded. Then someone came around the corner and she said, "Good, thanks," in the voice of someone concluding a professional exchange, and walked away, and Logan went back to his desk. His last day was a Thursday. He boxed his things in the morning. It didn't take long. He'd never been a desk decorator. and spent the afternoon doing handoff documentation he'd started 2 weeks earlier and finishing the notes for Marcus on the Whitmore project. At 4 o'clock, he did a round of the floor, said goodbye to the people he'd actually worked with, shook a lot of hands, accepted an embarrassingly large card that the admin team had gotten signed and that contained, in Mason-like fashion, some truly unhinged sentiments from people he'd barely spoken to. Ava was not on the floor when he left. He didn't expect her to be, and he didn't go looking. He took the elevator down, said goodbye to Gerald at the security desk, walked out through the lobby, and stood on Weston Avenue for a moment in the late afternoon, the city moving around him, the building behind him solid and indifferent. He'd expected it to feel like more. It just felt like a Thursday. He walked to his car and drove to pick up the kids. May was an exercise in recalibration. Logan filed for unemployment, updated his resume, and reached out to 3 contacts from his Aldrich Group days who he knew were still in the industry. He had savings, not a lot, but enough for several months if they were careful. And the kids' school situation was stable, and Deborah had a spare key and an open-door policy that had never once required asking. He kept a routine because the twins needed it: school drop-off, a few hours of job applications, and calls, pickup, homework, dinner, the nightly argument with Mason about whether 8:30 was genuinely bedtime or merely a suggestion. He and Ava talked every day. Not always calls, sometimes just texts, sometimes long ones, sometimes the specific shorthand they'd developed over months that meant they could say a lot in a few words. She told him about the board, about Kellerman's silence, which was worse in some ways than his activity, about the Q2 numbers coming in strong. He told her about the job search, about the callbacks, about the interview he'd done with a mid-size investment firm in the financial district that had gone well but left him feeling vaguely like he'd been applying for a job he didn't entirely want. "Why not?" she asked. They were on the phone, a Tuesday night in mid-May, the kids already down. "The culture," he said. "It's the Aldrich problem again. Very settled. Everyone knows their lane and nobody questions it." "You question things." "Constantly. It's a flaw." "It's not a flaw. It's professionally inconvenient sometimes. The best instincts usually are." A pause. "What would the right place look like?" He thought about it. "Smaller. More room to actually think rather than execute someone else's thinking. Work that matters in a way I can see." He paused. "I don't need to run something. I just need to feel like what I'm doing is connected to something real." She was quiet for a moment. "There's a firm called Hargrove Analytic Partners. They're small, about 40 people. They do complex financial modeling for mid-market companies in transition, restructuring, acquisition prep, strategic pivots." Another pause. "Their head of analysis is someone I went to school with. He's good." "Are you trying to find me a job?" "I'm mentioning a firm I happen to know." Ava. "His name is Daniel Chu. He mentioned 6 months ago they were looking to expand the team." A beat. "I'm not calling it anything. I'm telling you it exists." Logan exhaled. It was impossible to be annoyed at her when she was being this specific about it. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Do you do this for people you're not—" He paused, trying to find the right word. "Involved with?" "Sometimes," she said. "When they're worth it." It wasn't a declaration. Ava Sinclair didn't do declarations. But it was something, and he knew it was, and she knew he knew it. "Send me Chu's contact," he said. She sent it before he'd even finished the sentence. The interview with Daniel Chu was 2 weeks later, in a building on the east side that was nothing like Sinclair Capital. Smaller lobby, no framed articles, a waiting area with actual plants that appeared to be genuinely alive, which Logan took as a good sign. Chu was direct and quick, the kind of person who asked 3 questions and already knew the answer to the third by the time you finished the first. They spent 40 minutes going through Logan's methodology on the Whitmore project, which Chu had apparently read through a shared contact, and then another 20 talking about the firm's philosophy, which was essentially that most companies in transition were being failed by analysis that was technically correct but strategically blind, and that what they needed was people who could hold both. Logan went home and called Ava. "It's exactly the kind of place I was describing," he said. "I know," she said, without smugness. just factual. You knew before you mentioned it. I had a reasonable hypothesis.
That's a very Ava way to describe it. Thank you. A pause. Did it go well? I think so. Chu's hard to read. He's not, she said. He's direct. If he didn't think it went well, he would have told you. That's terrifying. It's efficient. A small pause. He's going to offer you the job. You don't know that. I know Daniel. He wouldn't have spent an hour with you if he wasn't sure. Chu called 4 days later with an offer. Logan stood in his kitchen reading the number and then sat down because the number was substantially better than he'd expected, better than Sinclair Capital, and the role had more latitude than anything he'd had before. He sat with it for 2 days, not because he was uncertain, but because he wanted to make the decision deliberately and not out of relief. He accepted on a Monday. He texted Ava. I took the job. Her response came immediately. Good. Then, 2 seconds later, you'll be good at it.
Then a minute after that,
I'm glad. He read that last one 3 times and then put his phone down and went to tell the kids, who received the news that Daddy had a new job with the level of interest 6-year-olds reserve for news that didn't immediately affect them, which was to say, Mason said, cool, and went back to his dinosaur journal, and Lily asked if the new job meant they were getting a dog, which it did not. And she received that information with the stoicism of someone who had expected as much. The offer from Hargrove came with a start date 3 weeks out, which meant Logan had 3 weeks of relative openness, and it was in that window, on a warm Friday evening in early June, that Ava showed up at his door. He hadn't expected her. She hadn't texted ahead, which was unusual. She always texted ahead. It was one of her things, the same reason she arrived early to everything. He opened the door, and she was standing there in a jacket he hadn't seen before, dark green, hair down, and she looked like she'd walked the 12 blocks from Kellner Street, which she had. I need to tell you something, she said. He stepped back to let her in. Okay. She came inside and stood in the hallway, not moving further into the apartment. The kids were at Deborah's. The apartment was quiet in the specific way it only was when they were gone, a different silence from nighttime, more empty. I've been thinking, she said, about what I want. She said it carefully, like she'd rehearsed the start of this and wasn't sure about the rest, which is something I'm not naturally good at, wanting things for myself that aren't professional, that aren't measurable. She looked at him. I want to be where you are. He held still. Say what you mean. I mean, she stopped, restarted. I mean that I spent 5 months watching you build something with your kids and your sister and your ridiculous radiator, and I've been eating dinner in my apartment alone 3 nights a week and thinking about Tuesday colors and dinosaur injustices, and I don't want to be doing that. The words came out more quickly than she usually spoke, like she'd decided to stop managing them. I don't want to be 12 blocks away having a separate life from you that we connect to occasionally on the phone. Ava, I know it's fast, she said. I know that. And I know what it looks like when someone who's spent their whole life alone suddenly decides they want something and moves toward it like there's no complexity involved. She held his gaze. There's complexity. I know there's complexity. I'm not pretending this is simple. What are you asking? I'm asking if there's room. She said the word carefully. Not just for me and you, for me and all of it. Mason's letters to the universe and Lily's color systems and your sister who runs background checks and Harold the radiator. Her voice was steadier now, finding its footing. I'm not asking to replace anything. I've been standing at the edge of something real for months, and I keep waiting for the right time to step in, and I think there isn't a right time. Logan looked at her standing in his hallway. The most competent person he'd met in years. Also the most honest she'd ever been with him. Also clearly terrified in the specific way of someone who had stopped protecting themselves and didn't know yet if it was going to be okay. Mason already considers you a family friend, he said. I know. Lily wants to show you 17 new drawings. I know that too. She texted me 3 of them last week through your phone when you left it unlocked. He almost laughed. When was that? Museum day. She got 3 in before you noticed. I didn't notice for 2 days. I know, she told me. Something in Ava's expression went soft and specific. She titled the third one for the lady who gets it. Logan was quiet for a moment. He felt that in a place that was harder to describe than his chest. "The new job is here," he said. "East Side. I wasn't planning on going anywhere." She blinked.
What? He'd said it wrong. He could see her recalibrating, thinking she'd missed something. "The job offer," he said. "It was here, in the city." He watched her face. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Because—" She stopped. "There was a position. At a firm in Portland. I heard about it 3 weeks ago, through a contact. It matched your profile exactly, and the compensation was—" She looked at him. "Did you know about it?" "No." "It would have been a good opportunity." "Maybe," he said, "but I have things here." She held his gaze. He watched her take that in. The specific way she took things in that wasn't visible to most people. The small internal processing that she didn't narrate but that he'd gotten good at reading in the stillness of her expression. "Things," she said. "Things," he confirmed. She exhaled. Something in her posture shifted. Not collapsing, nothing so dramatic, just releasing something it had been holding. "I prepared a whole argument," she said, "for why the move made sense, for why I'd come with you. I had 3 points. Were they good points?" "They were excellent points." "Tell me anyway." She looked at him. "You don't need them." "I want to hear them." She considered him for a moment, and then, for the first time since she'd walked in the door, she actually smiled. Not the brief restrained ones from the early months, not the surprised ones, but a full one that reached everything, that was just hers. "Point 1, she said, was that Hargrove Analytic Partners has a peer firm in Portland with comparable growth trajectory. Point 2 was that I have been delegating day-to-day operational decisions for the last 6 months in preparation for a reduced daily role. Point 3. She paused. "Point 3, he said. "Point 3 was that your kids need stability, and I know that, and I would never ask them to uproot for something that wasn't permanent." She looked at him steadily. "Which I suppose is also me telling you that I'm not here for something that isn't permanent." The hallway was very quiet. Outside, the city was doing its early evening thing. The particular ambient sound of a Friday, people moving toward wherever they were going. Logan crossed the hallway. He took her face in his hands the way he'd wanted to that night in the snow when she'd kissed him, and he'd been sensible about it. And this time he was not sensible, and she was not either. And when they separated, she stayed close, her hands at his jacket. "We'd have to find you a place," he said. 12 blocks is... I have a real estate contact." "Of course you do." She's very efficient. "We'd need to talk to the kids, properly. Not assuming anything, just, I know." She said it the way she'd been saying I know for months, meaning she'd already thought about it, had been thinking about it, had considered the angles. "I want to do it right." "Okay." He looked at her. "Then we do it right." "That's it?" "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know," she said. "Something more." "Ava." He kept his hands where they were. "You're here. I didn't move to Portland. The kids think you hang the moon and you think Tuesday is gray-blue, and you're standing in my hallway telling me you want to stay." He looked at her. "That's everything." She was quiet. Then, "I'm not good at this." "Neither am I. I'm going to get things wrong." "So will I. Frequently. I have a track record. The kids they deserve someone who knows what they're doing." "Nobody knows what they're doing," he said. "You show up, and you pay attention, and you try again when you mess it up. That's all it is." He paused. "And you pay attention better than almost anyone I've met." She held his gaze for a long moment. He could see her landing on something, the way she did. Not a decision exactly, more like an acknowledgement of a decision already made. "Okay," she said. Quiet and real. "Okay," he said. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, which surprised him. It was such an unguarded gesture. Nothing managed about it, just her weight shifting into him, and he put his arms around her and they stood in the hallway with the Friday city outside the window. "I'm calling my real estate contact tomorrow," she said into his jacket. "Saturday. She works Saturdays." "Of course she does." "I want something within walking distance, not 12 blocks, closer." 6, he said. 4. 5, and you can use my parking space. She considered. Done. He laughed. She did too, against his shoulder, and it was different from all the other versions of her laugh. Easier, more settled, like it had finally found the room it was supposed to be in. Outside, the city moved and hummed and didn't care the way cities didn't, but inside the third-floor apartment on Caldwell Street with the radiator named Harold and the bookshelves organized by emotional tone, something had settled into place that was not dramatic, not perfect, not without its complications, but solid, real. The particular realness of two people who had both spent a long time building walls deciding together to stop. When Deborah dropped the kids off 2 hours later, Lily came through the door, saw Ava on the couch, and said, "Oh, good, you're here," with the complete matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who had already filed this information under expected. Mason dropped his backpack in the hall and said, "Did you know there were 14 species of shark that survived the Cretaceous extinction?" "I did not," Ava said. "I'll tell you about them." "Please," she said, and meant it. Logan stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his daughter settle against Ava's side to show her the new drawings, watching his son pull out the journal to begin the shark briefing, watching Ava receive all of it with the careful, genuine attention that was simply who she was. And he thought about a Christmas Eve 7 months ago when he'd almost walked past a woman falling apart in a kitchen, and what a different life that would have been. He went to make dinner. Harold knocked. The apartment filled up with noise. The apartment Ava found was on Mercer Street, 4.5 blocks from Caldwell. She'd negotiated the half block as a point of principle, and Logan had stopped arguing when he realized she was serious. It was on the second floor of a building that was older than his but better maintained, with tall windows that let in the afternoon light, and a kitchen that was, by any reasonable measure, nicer than anything she needed, given that she cooked exactly 4 things reliably and burned everything else. She moved in on a Saturday in late June with 3 people from a moving company and 1 box she carried herself, which contained things she didn't explain and he didn't ask about. Deborah helped. Of course Deborah helped. She showed up with coffee and opinions and spent 40 minutes rearranging Ava's kitchen while Ava stood nearby with the expression of someone deciding whether to object, then deciding not to, then quietly moving 2 things back to where she'd had them. Deborah noticed and said nothing, which was, Logan thought, genuine growth. Mason helped by carrying 1 small lamp from the truck to the elevator, and then spending the rest of the afternoon telling the moving crew about the shark species that had survived the Cretaceous extinction. At least 2 of the crew seemed genuinely engaged. Lily sat in the corner of the living room with a notebook and cataloged everything as it came in, assigning it a position in what she called the emotional map of the space, a concept she explained to Ava in complete seriousness, and that Ava received in complete seriousness, and that Logan privately thought was the most Lily thing that had ever happened. By evening, the furniture was mostly where it belonged, and the boxes were stacked, and the new apartment smelled like cardboard and the takeout they'd ordered for dinner, 4 of them sitting on the floor of the living room because the table wasn't assembled yet. Lily still consulting her notebook, Mason having moved on from sharks to the general topic of whether movers needed to know dinosaur facts as a professional skill. "Probably not," one of the movers said, heading for the door. "You'd be surprised," Mason told him. Ava caught Logan's eye across the takeout containers, and he shook his head slightly, and she pressed her lips together against a smile. Later, after Deborah had taken the kids back to Caldwell for the night, Logan stayed to help finish unpacking the kitchen. They worked quietly, not talking much, the comfortable kind of quiet that had taken months to build. She knew where she wanted things, and he handed them to her, and occasionally she'd stand in front of a cabinet and think for too long, and he'd say, "Top shelf or second?" And she'd say, "Second," and move on. And it was unremarkable in every way that mattered. Around 10, she sat on the kitchen counter with a glass of water and looked around at what was beginning to look like a place someone lived. "It's strange," she said, "having somewhere that's just for being, as opposed to working, presenting, being somewhere for a reason." She looked at the window. "Even my old apartment felt like a staging area, somewhere I kept things between being somewhere else." She looked at the cabinet he'd just filled. "This feels different." "Good different?" She thought about it, which was something he'd come to love about her. She didn't answer questions like that automatically. "Yes,"
she said. A little unsettling. Also good. That tracks. She looked at him.
Do you know what Lily said to me today when she was doing the notebook? I'm afraid to ask. She said the apartment had sad colors when she came in, but that it would warm up when I put my things in it. Ava said it carefully, like she was still turning it over. She's 6. 7 in 2 months, Logan said.
7, she repeated. She said it like it was a fact, like she just knew.
She usually does.
Ava was quiet for a moment. I don't know what I'm doing with them, she said. Not distressed, honest. I don't mean that in a crisis way. I mean I have no framework. I didn't have this. She gestured vaguely. The thing where someone pays attention to what you need before you've named it. I don't have a model for how that works. Neither did I, he said. When Claire left, I had 2 3-year-olds and no idea what I was doing. I'm still figuring it out. You're better at it than you think you are. I have good days and bad days, and the bad days are really bad sometimes. He leaned against the opposite counter. Last February, Mason had a meltdown in the grocery store for 40 minutes, and I sat on the floor with him in the cereal aisle because I didn't know what else to do, and a woman walked past and looked at me like I was failing visibly. He paused. Maybe I was, but he calmed down eventually, and we got the cereal and went home, and he was fine the next day. What did you do in the cereal aisle for 40 minutes? Waited, he said. Mostly. Talked a little. Let him feel whatever he was feeling without trying to fix it faster than it would fix. He looked at her. That's most of it, honestly. The waiting. Being present while something difficult is happening without trying to make it stop faster than it's going to stop. She looked at him steadily. You're describing more than parenting. Yeah, he said. I know.
They looked at each other across the kitchen, the new apartment quiet around them, and it was one of those moments that didn't announce itself, just settled, soft and substantial, over everything. I'm going to get things wrong with them, she said. Yes. I need you to tell me when I do, not manage it. Tell me. I will. I mean it. I'd rather know. I know you would. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her where she sat on the counter. And when you get things right, which is going to be most of the time, I'll tell you that too. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder, the same way she'd done in his hallway 2 weeks earlier. And he thought about how that gesture had surprised him the first time, how uncharacteristic it had seemed, and how now it just seemed like her. People were not fixed things. That was something he'd had to learn and relearn. The version of Ava Sinclair who had sat on a kitchen floor on Christmas Eve crying alone was the same woman who stood in a boardroom and dismantled a governance challenge with 4 years of financial data. Both were real. The walls she'd built hadn't been weakness. They'd been a reasonable response to a life that had taught her that depending on people was how you got left. Dismantling them wasn't a transformation. It was just trust, accumulated slowly through 100 small moments of not being abandoned. He wrapped his arms around her. Welcome home, he said. She laughed, quiet against his shoulder. It's 4.5 blocks away. Still counts. Well, the year that followed was not a montage. It was Tuesday mornings when the twins were late for school, and Ava was already at the door in her coat saying, Mason, shoes, now, in her boardroom voice that worked better than Logan's on Mason specifically, something nobody had predicted and everyone eventually accepted. It was Lily presenting Ava with a drawing every week without fail, sometimes explained and sometimes simply handed over with the expectation that Ava would know what it meant. And Ava usually did, or asked the right question when she didn't. It was dinners at Logan's apartment that happened most nights because his kitchen was larger and the twins preferred it, and Ava had quietly admitted that cooking for 4 people was more interesting than cooking for 1, even if she still burned the edges of things she shouldn't. It was the Sunday in August when Lily had the bad week, the one that started with a fight with her only close friend at school and spiraled into 3 days of quiet that worried Logan more than yelling would have. Lily going interior in the way she did when something hurt and she didn't know how to say it. Logan tried and got partial sentences. Deborah tried and got a shrug. Ava came over on Wednesday evening, sat on Lily's floor without asking permission, and opened her own notebook. not Lily's, her own work notebook, and started writing something. Lily watched her for a few minutes from the bed. Then, "What are you doing?" "Writing down things that are bothering me," Ava said. "I do it sometimes when I can't figure out how to say them out loud." "Does it work?" "Sometimes. Sometimes I just end up with a list of things that are bothering me, and it doesn't solve anything, but at least they're somewhere outside my head instead of inside it." Lily was quiet. Then she got off the bed and sat next to Ava on the floor. "Can I see?" "These ones are private," Ava said. "But you could write your own." Lily borrowed the notebook. She wrote something Logan never asked about, and Ava never told him, and then she tore out the page and folded it up and put it in her nightstand. The next morning, she was better. Not fixed. There wasn't a fix. The friendship with the school friend stayed complicated for another 2 months, but back to herself. Enough to eat breakfast and tell Mason his pronunciation of a dinosaur name was wrong and reorganize one section of the bookshelf. Logan found Ava in the kitchen after, coffee in hand, looking at the window. "What did you write in the notebook?" he asked. "Things that were bothering me." "Were they actually?" She looked at him. "Some of them." She looked back at the window. "I've been thinking about the board. Kellerman submitted another restructuring proposal last week, his fourth." A pause. "But this time 3 of his 4 coalition members didn't sign it. So he's losing ground." "He's losing ground," she confirmed. "Voss had a conversation with 2 of the others. I don't know exactly what she said, but the result was notable." She turned the mug in her hands. "I've been at this company for 6 years. I've survived every challenge they've put in front of me. And I think—" She paused. "I think he's finally running out of moves." "What happens when he does?" "He retires, or he doesn't, but either way the dynamic shifts." She looked at Logan. "I've been thinking about restructuring the governance model, proactively, making the CEO role more accountable in ways I design rather than ways that get imposed." She held his gaze. "It's the kind of thing that requires giving up some control, but it takes the weapon out of their hands." "Can you do that?" "It was my company before it was their investment," she said. "Yes, I can do that." He watched her. 6 years ago, he thought, she'd sat on a kitchen floor and told him she was the most alone she'd ever been. Now she stood in his kitchen at 7 in the morning talking about proactive governance restructuring while his kids ate cereal in the next room and Harold knocked somewhere behind the walls, and the distance between those 2 moments was the entire story. "Do it," he said. "I intend to." She smiled at him, brief and real. "I just needed to say it out loud first." "I know," he said. "That's what I'm here for." The proposal happened on a Sunday in October, 8 days before Mason and Lily's 7th birthday. Logan had not planned it for a Sunday in October. He had not planned it particularly at all, in the sense of a structured plan. No restaurant reservation, no ring box in a jacket pocket for 3 weeks. He'd bought the ring 6 days earlier on a Thursday from a jeweler on Prescott Street that Deborah had told him about with the specificity of someone who had been waiting for this assignment. He'd gone alone on his lunch break and stood at the counter and described Ava in practical terms. Her taste, which was spare and precise. Her hands, which were always working. The fact that she never wore things that got in the way. And the woman behind the counter had shown him 4 options, and he'd known immediately, the way you sometimes did. He'd been carrying the ring since Thursday. He wasn't waiting for the right moment. He was waiting for a moment that was theirs. Not staged, not performed. It was a Sunday. They'd taken the kids to the Natural History Museum, the same one from 10 months earlier, and Mason had led Ava through the entire prehistoric hall at a pace that suggested he'd prepared an itinerary, which he had. Lily had found a new installation in the geology section and stood in front of it for 20 minutes making notes. On the way out, Mason spotted a coyote fossil in the gift shop case and spent 11 minutes negotiating with Logan about it. The negotiation concluded with a compromise that satisfied nobody completely, which Logan privately thought was the correct outcome of most negotiations. They walked home through the October afternoon, the city in full fall color, leaves on the sidewalk, the air carrying that particular clean sharpness of the season turning. Lily was on Ava's shoulders. She'd gotten tired halfway back, which she would deny under any interrogation,
and Ava had simply offered without making it a thing. Mason walked beside Logan with his hands in his pockets, occasionally narrating observations about the coyote fossil situation, which he had not fully accepted. It was a reasonable ask, he said. It was $40, Logan said. Fossils are irreplaceable. It was a replica. The craftsmanship. Mason. Fine. They were on the block before Caldwell when Logan said, "Can we sit for a minute?" and gestured at the small concrete park on the corner, 2 benches, a handful of trees, pigeons doing what pigeons did. It wasn't much. It was also exactly what he was looking for. They sat. Lily slid down from Ava's shoulders and immediately began examining a leaf she'd found, holding it up to the light with the intensity of a scientist.
Mason folded himself onto the bench and pulled out the small notebook he'd started carrying because Ava had one and he'd decided he needed one, which was a development Logan had feelings about. Ava sat beside Logan and looked at the trees. The afternoon light was low and gold and fell across everything softly, and the city moved around the small park as it always did, present and indifferent. He reached into his jacket pocket. "I want to say something," he said. Ava turned to look at him. Mason looked up from the notebook. Lily kept holding her leaf to the light for 3 more seconds, and then, with the specific instinct she'd always had for the atmospheric temperature of a room or a moment, lowered it and looked at her father. "I've been thinking about what I want to say, and I don't have a speech," he said. He was looking at Ava. "I know you well enough to know you'd trust something without a speech more than something with one." She was very still. "I know your coffee order and that you arrive early to everything because waiting makes you anxious, and that you cry sometimes over things you don't explain, and that you think Tuesday is gray-blue." He held her gaze. "I know you sat on a kitchen floor on Christmas Eve and told me there was nobody to call, and that was the most alone I've ever heard anyone be, and I know that's not who you are now." He paused. "I want to be with the whole thing, the woman who runs a company and the one who sat on the floor, the one who knows exactly what she wants and the one who's still figuring some of it out." He opened his hand, the ring in his palm. "I want to keep doing this with you, all of it, for a very long time." Ava looked at the ring and then at him and then at the ring again, and her expression went through something that she didn't try to control, which was unusual for her, and he could see it all. The thing she hadn't expected to have, the weight of being offered it, the specific complicated feeling of wanting something completely. "Dad," Mason said in a loud whisper, "is this what I think it is?" "Mason," Logan said, "because I've been waiting to—" "Mason, I just think it's good timing with the museum and everything. Mason, I need 30 seconds. Mason closed his mouth and picked up his notebook. Lily had said nothing. She was standing very still, holding her leaf, watching Ava with an expression that was serious and searching in the way Lily looked at things she needed to understand completely. Ava looked at Logan. Her eyes were bright in the specific way they got when she was holding something in. "You bought a ring," she said. "I did." "Without telling me." "That's generally how this works. I like to know things in advance." "I know." "This is—" She stopped. "You're asking me to marry you." "I'm asking you to be part of this family," he said. "You already are. I just want to make it permanent." She looked at the ring. She looked at him. She looked at Lily, who was still watching her with that steady, searching gaze. And something happened in her expression that had nothing to do with the ring or the question. Something that happened specifically because of the way Lily was looking at her, which was the way Lily looked at the things she'd decided were hers. "Lily," Ava said. "Yeah," Lily said. "Is this okay with you?" Lily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. 5 seconds. 10. Mason opened his mouth and Lily held up one finger without looking at him, and he closed it. "I already told you you'd come back," Lily said finally. "That first night. I knew." "I know you did," Ava said. "So yes," Lily said. "It's okay with me." A pause. "It's more than okay." Ava turned back to Logan. Her jaw was set in the way it got when she was feeling too much, and holding herself together around it. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady, just barely. "Yes." He put the ring on her finger. It fit,
which Deborah would later claim was because she'd secretly measured one of Ava's other rings 2 months earlier and passed the size to the jeweler, a fact she was extraordinarily smug about. Mason erupted. There was no other word for it. He went from contained to fully expressive in under a second, which was very on brand, throwing himself at both of them simultaneously in the way that at 45 pounds was manageable and at 75 would be a hazard. Lily came more quietly, the way she always did, tucking herself against Ava's side, and Ava put her arm around her and held on in the specific way she'd learned. Not too tight, not performative, just present. They sat like that on the bench for a while as the October afternoon went on around them, and the pigeons regrouped nearby, and a man walked a very old dog very slowly past the park, and the trees did what trees did in October, which was to look as beautiful as they were ever going to look before letting everything go. Logan looked at his family on a park bench in the city where they lived and thought, this is the thing, not a perfect version of it, the real one. The wedding was in March, 14 months after a Christmas Eve in a kitchen. Small. They'd both agreed on small without much discussion, which was itself a sign of how well they'd gotten to know each other. Deborah and a handful of close friends on Logan's side. A small number of people from Ava's life who had earned the designation over the years. Daniel Chu, who had become a genuine friend since Logan joined Hargrove. Miriam Voss, who came quietly and sat in the back and didn't stay long for the reception but caught Ava's eye once across the room in a way that said everything it needed to. The officiant was a friend of Deborah's who did this on weekends and had a genuine gift for not being cloying about it. Mason wore his suit jacket for exactly 22 minutes before removing it. Lily wore a blue dress she'd selected in January and refused to reconsider, and which was, everyone had to admit, exactly right. The ceremony was in a room with good light and tall windows and no excessive decoration, because Ava had a position on excessive decoration, which was that it distracted from the actual thing. Logan had agreed. They stood facing each other, and what they said was short and specific. Not borrowed language, not sweeping declarations, just the particular private things that two people say to each other when they know each other well enough that the public version can be brief. He said, I choose this every day, not just now. Every ordinary day that comes after. She said, you gave me somewhere to be when I had nowhere. I want to spend the rest of my life making that reciprocal. Mason said audibly from the front row. That was good. Deborah next to him. Mason? I'm just saying, Mason. Lily, on Mason's other side, said nothing. She was holding the small notebook she'd been keeping for 8 months, the one that had started on the floor of her bedroom after the bad week, that had accumulated drawings and observations, and one folded page she kept private. She held it in her lap and watched her father and Ava with the expression she reserved for things she understood completely. The adoption process took 11 months. It was not smooth. Nothing that involved that much paperwork and that many appointments and that many people who needed to sign things was ever smooth. And there were weeks when it seemed like it was moving and weeks when it didn't move at all. And one specific Thursday in September when Ava sat in Logan's kitchen after a call with their attorney and put her head down on the table for a full minute without speaking. Logan put coffee in front of her. He didn't say anything. She lifted her head. The agency wants another document, she said. Which one? The one we already submitted in June. I'll call them in the morning. I already sent the email. She straightened up, picked up the coffee. I'm not losing my mind over it. I just needed a minute. Take the minute. She looked at him. You're annoyingly good at that. At what? Not making it worse. She looked at the table. My mother called again, by the way. What did she want? She said she heard through someone that I was getting married. She wanted to know if... She stopped. It doesn't matter. What did you tell her? That I wished her well and that I wasn't interested in rebuilding something that had fallen down too many times. She said it evenly. The same thing I've been telling her, but this time I meant it more than the last time. She paused. Each time I mean it a little more. Until you mean it completely. Yes. She looked at the window. I spent a lot of years being angry at her, and then a lot of years being sad about it, and now I mostly just feel finished with it, which is different. She turned the cup. She's a person who couldn't do what the situation required. That's not...
It's not a crime. It just means she's not someone I can afford to keep in the middle of my life. Logan thought about what it had cost her to get to that sentence. All the nights on the phone and the dinners that hadn't gone well, and the years of carrying a wound she'd been too self-sufficient to admit was bleeding. People talked about closure like it was an event, a door you walked through. It wasn't. It was a direction you moved in, slowly, accumulating enough distance from the thing that hurt you until one day you looked back and the size of it had changed. "You're different than you were," he said, not as a compliment, just as a fact. "So are you," she said. "Yeah." He looked at her. "Is it better or worse?" She considered it the way she considered everything, honestly, without rushing toward the comfortable answer. "Better," she said. "Harder in some ways, but better." She looked at him. "You made it harder." "Sorry." "Don't be. Harder means I'm actually doing something instead of just maintaining." She paused. "Maintaining was very comfortable. I was very good at it. You're better at this." She almost smiled. "Don't tell me what I'm good at." "You're terrible at compliments?" "I'm excellent at compliments. I just prefer to give them when they're accurate." That was accurate. "Fine," she said. "Thank you." She picked up her coffee. "Now call that agency in the morning before I do, because when I call government offices, I sound impatient, and it makes everything take longer." "That's the most self-aware thing you've ever said." "I have my moments." The day the adoption finalized was a Wednesday, which was nobody's first choice for a significant day, but which turned out to be exactly right in its unremarkableness. They were in a courtroom that was smaller than Logan had expected, with fluorescent lighting that was not flattering to anyone, and a judge who had clearly done this hundreds of times and brought to it the specific warmth of someone who found genuine meaning in the repetition. Mason sat very straight in his chair, which was unusual enough that Logan noticed it and said nothing. Lily held Ava's hand from the moment they sat down and did not let go. The judge read the documentation, asked the questions he was required to ask. Logan answered. Ava answered. Mason answered one question directed at him with the particular Mason combination of directness and extra information. Yes, he wanted this, and also he had prepared a list of things he thought Ava should know about him formally, which included the dinosaur journal, the letters to the universe, and the ongoing injustices list, which he could provide on request. The judge looked at Mason for a moment over his reading glasses. Then he said, "I'll take that under advisement." Mason nodded like this was the correct response and sat back. Lily, when her question came, just said, "Yes, she's already my mom. We're just making it official." The fluorescent lights hummed. The judge signed the documents. He looked up at the four of them. This particular arrangement of people who had found each other through a Christmas Eve and a snowstorm and a bar and a kitchen floor and a walk through 12 blocks of city, and said, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had meant it the same way hundreds of times and still meant it, "Congratulations, you're a family." Nobody said anything for a second. Then Mason said, "We were already a family." "Mason," Logan said, "I'm just pointing out—" "He's right," Ava said, quietly. She was looking at the judge, but Logan knew she meant it for the room, for all of them. "He's right. We were already." Oh. They went to the bar on Weston Avenue that evening. Logan had suggested it, and Ava had been quiet for a moment before saying yes, and he'd known she understood why. It was the same bar. Not the same lighting. They'd changed something overhead, but the same bar stools and the same worn wood of the counter and the same street outside where the snow had been falling the night he'd walked past and almost kept walking. It was December again, not Christmas Eve, but close, the city in the particular heightened state of the season, with its lights and its traffic and its managed chaos. They took a booth, all four of them, which was not how the bar was configured for families, but which the staff accommodated without complaint when Mason explained that it was a significant occasion. Mason had been explaining the significance of the occasion to anyone who would listen for the past 4 hours. Lily ordered hot chocolate and examined the booth with the measuring gaze she applied to new spaces, deciding something about it. Mason ordered the same and immediately opened his notebook to add the bar to a list Logan couldn't see but could guess at. Logan ordered a beer. Ava ordered what she always ordered when she was in a bar, which was whiskey, neat, and held it in her hands the way she had the first night, except that everything else was different. She looked around the bar. Logan watched her do it. The slow survey of the room, the street outside, the bar stool at the far end where she'd been sitting, the particular corner of the space that had looked on Christmas Eve 14 months ago like the loneliest place in the world. She looked at the glass in her hands. "I was sitting right there," she said. "You were. You almost walked past." "I did walk past," he said. "I turned around." She looked at him. "Why?" It was a real question. He'd never actually answered it. "Because you looked like someone who needed a minute not to be alone," he said. "And I've been that person, and I know what it looks like." She held his gaze. Across the table, Lily was drawing something in the small notebook she'd brought, and Mason was adding to his list, and the bar was warm and a little loud with the December Friday crowd, and outside the window the city was doing everything a city did, moving, continuous, holding its 10,000 separate stories all at once. "I was so sure," Ava said, "that this was just what my life was. The alone version." She looked at the glass. "I'd been alone for so long I'd convinced myself I'd chosen it, that it was a preference, not a wound." "It was both," Logan said. "Yes," she said. "It was both." She turned the glass once. "I think that's the honest version. I was wounded, and I made a preference out of it because preferences feel like agency and wounds don't." She looked up. "You didn't fix the wound. I want to be clear about that. I did that. Slowly, badly, with a lot of help from a therapist I still see on Thursdays." "I know. You just made it possible to want something different." She looked at him. "You made it seem worth the effort." He looked at her across the booth table. This woman he'd sat on a kitchen floor with and walked 12 blocks through the snow with and argued with about movies and watched sit on a museum floor with his daughter and watched hold herself together through board challenges and bad dinners with her mother and an adoption process that had required more documents than either of them had believed possible. He looked at her and thought about all the ways a life could go. All the Christmas Eves he could have been on a different side of the building, all the hallways he could have walked down faster, all the floors he could have not sat on. You made choices, some were large, and you knew it at the time. More were small, and you didn't know until later what you'd decided. Stopping in a doorway, sitting down on cold tile, asking someone if they needed somewhere to be. The truth was that you never quite knew which moments were the ones that changed things. You only knew afterward, looking back, that the thread ran through them, that this had led to that, and that had led to this. And somewhere in the middle of a chain of unremarkable decisions, a life had been built that you would not have imagined for yourself, and that fit, imperfectly and completely, like the only life that had ever been possible. "Lily," Mason said, looking at her notebook, "what are you drawing?" "All of us," she said. "Can I see?" She turned the notebook. It was not representational art. Lily didn't work that way. It was color and shape and arrangement, 4 distinct presences in a space, rendered in the particular palette she used when she was describing something that felt like being inside something warm. There was no way to tell which figure was which, except that one of them was a color she'd been using for Ava since December of the previous year, the one she'd told Ava about once, the one that was the specific tone of someone who paid attention. "That's good," Mason said. He turned back to his notebook. "I'm adding this bar to the list." "What list?" Logan asked. "Important places," Mason said, like this was obvious. "I've been keeping it. The museum is on there. The cereal aisle." "The cereal aisle." "That was an important day," Mason said simply. "You sat on the floor with me." Logan looked at his son. 7 years old, a notebook full of dinosaur facts and grievances, and apparently also important places. A candy cane somewhere on his person that Logan had not yet located. He looked at Lily, drawing the 4 of them in a bar booth in colors that meant things he only partially understood. He looked at Ava, who was watching the kids with an expression that was unguarded and specific. Not trying to look a certain way, just looking. "Can I add something?" Ava asked Mason. Mason pushed the notebook across the table. Ava turned to a new page and wrote one thing and turned it back. Mason read it and looked at her, and then at the page again. "Yeah," he said. "That should be on there." Logan didn't ask what it was. Some things were for the people who needed them, and that was enough. Outside the window, the December city moved and lit itself and carried on. In a bar on Weston Avenue, a family finished their drinks and pulled on their coats and gathered their notebooks and their drawings and their lists of important places and went home. The snow started on the walk back. Of course it did. Logan noticed it first, the particular quality of silence that preceded it, the air changing, the first few flakes catching the streetlight. He looked up. Beside him, Ava tilted her face toward it with the particular expression she'd had that first night. Eyes up, the city around her, something open in her face that wasn't usually there. He took her hand. She looked at him sideways, snow in her hair again, and something moved across her face that had no words that were adequate. Just the whole accumulated fact of the year and a half since he'd stopped at the right moment, the right doorway, the right kitchen. "Cold," she said. "Yeah," he said. They kept walking. The snow came down around them, soft and indifferent, covering everything equally, making no distinction between the roads they'd walked before and the ones they hadn't yet. Lily caught a flake on her notebook cover and examined it with the notebook held flat. Mason announced that the snowflake crystallization process was actually quite underrated as a natural phenomenon, and that he planned to add it to the journal. Harold knocked somewhere ahead of them in the building they were approaching, in his particular rhythm, doing what he did. The city held all of them, the way cities did. Without noticing, without caring, just making room. That was enough. More than enough. It was in fact everything.